As the country continues to reflect on the legacy of the late founder of the IFP, Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi, we visit the museum that documents his life and times. Now, the Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Museum and Documentation Center has been around since 2015, and that's where we find our reporter, Linda Minisi, who's going to tell us about what he has seen at the museum. Linda, good morning to you. Talk to us about what interesting finds have you come across?
Well, Xoli, you'll remember that this museum was opened in August 2015, and Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi making a speech at that time and making remarks that this would be the beginning of a journey into the truth of what was, what happened, and how it shaped our country. This, of course, comes up now as more and more people reflect on the life and times of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. I mean, the pictures here tell the story of the man in his different forms. And also, you'll remember, this is an important time as, of course, it is the build-up to the funeral, which will be held on Saturday. As you rightfully mentioned, South Africans at this very moment reflecting on his history and the life and times of Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi. You'll remember that this is Umntwana wakwaPhindangene and was born into royalty in 1928. And one of the things that stand out as you just enter this particular museum is, of course, his family history. Princess Magoko right at the center of it all. You'll remember she is the daughter of King Dinuzulu, the granddaughter of King Cetshwayo. I'm joined now by the CEO of the Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Foundation, Senzo, Mfayela. Thank you so much for your time. This is an important monument right in the heart of Ulundi, documenting the life and times of Umntwana, as he was popularly known. But I want us to start with his family history and his background.
Thank you, Bob. As we start here, this depicts the fact that Umntwana is both the product of history and a servant of history from the very beginning of his life. Here you see him with members of his family on both sides. The Zulu royal family and the Buthelezi family. These are different important members of the family, including the kings, as you see them down there. And this is what produced the man. And he grew up following history to be where we find him today.
And the importance of placing his mother, Princess Magoko, right at the center of it all.
Yes, well, King Dinuzulu, sitting there, one of the Zulu kings that suffered the most. If you talk about dispossession, if you talk about imprisonment, he died in banishment. He died in banishment. Princess Magoko is his daughter. Then Princess Magoko married Inkosi yakwaButhelezi, Inkosi uMathole. That marriage produced Umntwana.
All right. So I see also, not far from where we're standing, above Mfayela, there is also the history around his education. If you could just take us through that. I mean, all of it from Adams College right till Fort Hare University, where he met other leaders like the likes of Robert Mugabe.
This is where history again plays its role. Umntwana gets to be a scholar at Fort Hare. At Fort Hare, he meets again with Inkosi Luthuli. Remember, he first saw Inkosi Luthuli visiting his uncle, KwaNongoma. Then he meets him as a teacher at Fort Hare. he meets Z.K. Matthews as a teacher. He is in the same school with Joshua Ngomo. And one of his teachers as well was one Mr. Amos Shembe, who ended up being one of the leaders of the Shembe Church. This established relationships that are going to be very important later in his life. For instance, Mtwana had a very deep relationship with Fatima Mia and her husband. Part of that relationship was built at the time when he was studying at home for the exam. The Mias used to take notes for him so that he could study and write his 4th exam, which he passed, and then went back to 4th to graduate. So there was that personal. People used to wonder why Mtwana and Fatima Mia and her husband were so close. Part of it is that when he was in a dark corner, the Fatima Mia and her husband stood by him and helped him along.
And even at Fort Hare, I mean, the political activity is seen there in particular when you look at the kind of people that he met there and the history behind his times at Fort Hare. I'm wondering how this museum then captures also his political life, because we see it in various forms. I mean, he was a staunch believer, but also a man who believed in traditions and culture as well. But also, he's also popularly known in South Africa for politics.
Yes, at Fort Hare, that's where his politics were really grounded. Umntwana would tell you the first speech that was delivered by Sobukwe at Fort Hare as the first president of the Youth League. He would stand up and emulate Sobukwe word for word in that speech, where Sobukwe promised them that they will fight and liberate Africa from Cape to Cairo. Even hand gestures, Sobukwe's hand gestures, Mtwana remembered them in that speech. He meets again with Professor Matthews. He meets with people like Robert Mugabe. He meets with the former Prime Minister of Lesotho. He meets with the former Prime Minister of Botswana. That's where he developed a lot of contacts across Africa. One of the critical historical facts, because of his relationship at Fort Hare with Robert Mugabe and at Adams College with Joshua Ngomo, Mtwana was briefed personally by both Mugabe and Ngomo in London during the negotiations for the liberation of Zimbabwe. So all these issues that people talk about, land issues and things like that, Mugabe and Ngomo briefed Mtwana personally whilst the negotiations were going on in London, because he happened to be in London at the same time when he went for a meeting with the ANC.
And lastly, just before I let you go, one of the things that will strongly come out is his involvement, especially in the run-up to the funeral, is his contribution to culture and traditions. As you see there, the Zulu family tree clearly depicted there on your screens. But a funeral like that of Umdonogwa, who was the traditional prime minister for the longest of time, who's seen different kings come and take the throne. What are we likely to see? And talk to us about how that is reflected in this museum.
It's this museum, his funeral, and everything about Mtwana is a spectacle, because that's what his life was like. For instance, we cannot tell you now how many people are going to be there. We cannot tell you where they're going to be coming from. Now try to match that with the concept of a state funeral. It's an organizational nightmare. Right now, some of my colleagues are negotiating with Amabutu with what is it going to be their role in the context of a state funeral. We've got to negotiate with different denominations of church denominations. What roles are they going to play? Because obviously the main role is going to be the Anglican, and the SNDF chaplain. But you can't leave out other denominations because they know him as theirs as well. Then you add to that Amakos, you add the royal household. There has never been something like it in history. We are just fortunate to be part of that history to try to make it happen. Whether we succeed or not, we'll see Saturday evening.
All right. Thank you so much. That is Senzo Mfayela there, the CEO of the Prince Mangosuthu Buthelezi Foundation, Tony, reflecting on the history and what we're seeing here. I mean, all of these facets that you see around us will be depicted and will be shown throughout the course of the day, going from tomorrow, in fact, and right up until the end of the funeral, which is Saturday. Quite complex, right? Listening to all of these things having to come together for a man who made contributions in all these sectors of his life, not only in politics, but in the traditional sphere, but also in the religious community. So all of that will, of course, be shown come Saturday. Oli?
Linda Minisi, thank you very much. What a reflection, particularly at a time when we read media reports suggesting that there already is some kind of disagreement between the IFP and the ANC as to whether or not a monument should be put up, for example, at the provincial legislature. Some disagreement there.